Okay, as John Wood wants to be the leader in workforce education, so we thought we would lead by sponsoring the keynote speaker today. And so we're very excited to welcome to the stage Jack Uldrich. Jack is a global futurist and best-selling author. He's going to talk to you today about his AHA method, and we're excited to have him share his knowledge. So please help me welcome Jack.
Thanks, Tracy. Bear with me as I bring up my presentation here. Okay, so as Tracy said, the title of my presentation is The Big AHA, and it's all about how to future-proof the tri-state area. And I'm going to cut right to the chase and tell you what the Big AHA is, because I like everyone to take away a Big AHA from every presentation I give. And here's the Big AHA. What it stands for, it's an acronym. It's how I want you to think about the future. It stands for awareness, humility, and action. And in the course of this presentation, I'm going to walk through each one of those three principles. But before I do that, in order to understand what is coming next, I love to study history. And this is a picture of Fifth Avenue in New York City in the year 1900. If you look closely, every vehicle on that road is a horse-drawn carriage, except for one. It's one of the world's first automobiles. Now, this is the exact same street just 13 years later. It is all automobiles, except for there's one old holdover, and there it was. So here's my point, is that we understand that the world can change fast. History tells us that. And I'm here to tell you that we are about to live through a similar change, that we're all in the horse industry. Whether you're in healthcare, manufacturing, agriculture, the world is about to change, and it's going to change really fast. And if you don't believe that, let me just walk you through the last couple of weeks in terms of technological change. I'm not sure how many of you saw this, but just last week, this robot is now being deployed in fast food restaurants. So that was just last week. And then the week before that, Google came out with a brand new project called Pixel. And for $159, here's what it does.
So with Pixel Buds, I can use real-time Google Translate to have a natural conversation in 40 languages.
So suddenly, we can already communicate with all 7.5 billion people on the planet because of that technology. You can't tell me that that's not going to transform global trade, transform a lot of different industries. The world's changing right before our very eyes. And then just the week before that, I know you do a lot in terms of distribution and logistics. This little self-driven robot is now on the road in California making deliveries. So the world is changing before our very eyes, and we need to be aware of what's already happening today, because I'm here to tell you these trends are going to grow exponentially. And here's the next thing I need you to do in order to future-proof the tri-state area. You need to start thinking like a futurist. And this was the theme of a book I wrote a couple years ago called Jump the Curve. And when I was writing it, I came across a great quote from Albert Einstein, and he said to scientists and technologists many years ago, he said, "If you can't explain what you're working on to a 6-year-old child, you're a fraud." I thought, hey, that's a really good test. Just so happens when the book came out, my son Sean was only 6 years old. So I wanted to see if he could understand what I meant by jump the curve, because I need you to understand this concept. And I didn't know how to do this, but one day he came to me, he was very excited. He'd lost his first tooth. I thought, oh, I'm going to teach my son how to jump the curve. So I said to him, imagine the tooth fairy comes to you this evening, gives you 2 different options for your teeth. And it's a fact, all babies have 20 teeth. Option number 1, tooth fairy is going to give you $5 per tooth. I'm a pretty cheap guy, so I said, look, son, this is just a hypothetical example. I'm not telling you the tooth fairy is going to bring. But I go, that's one option. The second option is you get a penny for your first tooth, 2 for your second, and that penny doubles 20 times. Which one are you going to take? Without batting an eye, he goes, I'm taking the $5, Dad. That would be $100 in total. I go, okay, fair enough. Do you, however, know how much your 20th tooth under the penny doubling would be worth? Sheepishly, as a 6-year-old boy, he said, no. I said, well, as your old man, I'm about to tell you, would have been worth $5,242.88. To which he promptly said, no way. I said, yes way. And then I said, look, son, I'm going to introduce you to the pleasures of plotting and graphing. And we plotted that penny doubling out. Early on, the doubling looks insignificant. 2 pennies, 4, doesn't look like it's going anywhere. But after just 20 doublings, that curve shoots up to over $5,000. So if my son would have wanted to understand the implications of the Tooth Fairy's offer, he'd have had to jump that exponential curve. That's the reason a 6-year-old boy needs to know how to jump the curve. The reason we need to know how to jump the curve, today, no fewer than 10 technological forces continue to double. It is computer processing power, it's data storage, it's bandwidth, it's the sequencing of genomes, advances in biotechnology, nanotechnology, robotics, 3D printing, sensor technology. All of these trends, they're not increasing linearly, they're increasing exponentially. So this is the curve we all have to jump, because that is where the future is going to take place. And now let me just give you an example of someone who I think epitomizes what jumping the curve is all about. And this is Reed Hastings. He's the founder of Netflix. 20 years ago, he wanted to start a business. What did he want to do? He wanted to send movies through the mail. That didn't work 20 years ago because movies were big, fat, clunky VHS cassettes. But there was one trend that was doubling every 6 months, and it was data storage. He goes, in 1995, I can't do anything with that today, but in a couple of years, it's going to get so good that we're going to start putting movies on what? On DVDs, and they're going to be so thin I can pop them in the mail. And he started a very successful business doing that. But here's where it gets interesting. 2005, he looks out to the future again. He said, oh, bandwidth is doubling in capacity every 6 months. I can't do anything with it in 2005, but in a couple of years, what are we going to start doing? Streaming movies. He was always looking at what is coming next. But I want to go back to this idea of exponential growth. So many people misunderstand exponential growth. It looks linear in the beginning, but you have to understand where the future is headed. My point is, data storage and bandwidth should have been obvious to other people in the industry, but this next photo doesn't need any explanation. There should have been executives who said the world is changing and we have to start preparing for that future. This is the fate we all want to avoid. But I'll tell you, here's where it gets even more interesting. 2012, Reed Hastings looked out to the future again. He said, oh, bandwidth is going to get so cheap, everyone's going to get into distributing movies. So what did they start doing just 5 years ago? They started producing their own shows. It's a fundamentally different business model. But just last week, more people spend more time on Netflix than all cable television together. And that's a business they got into just 5 years ago. We all need to be jumping the curve. But now, because exponential growth is so important, I really need you to understand this concept. Who could tell me, and to sort of drive this point home, I'm going to give away a copy of one of my books to whoever gets this question. What is the mathematical relationship between these numbers? 1,000, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion. Anyone know? Raise your hand if you think you know. There's some mathematical relationship. No one? Surely there must be someone. Yeah, who said 1,000? Raise your hand. Okay, whoever it is, come get your book afterwards. Each one is 1,000 times larger than the next. Here's why I want to go back to exponential growth. If something doubles 10 times, it's not 10 times as big. Through the power of exponential growth, it's 1,000. We go from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024. So here's my point. There are going to be a handful of technologies that double 10 times in the coming decade. And that means we're going to see 1,000-fold increase. Now, undoubtedly, some of you are shaking your head going, no, we're not going to see 1,000-fold increase. You know what? Before I talk to you anymore about the future, let's just step back 20 years. I want to see how many of you can recognize this sound from 1998. How many of you can recognize that? Some of you who are a little bit older might be able to. Those of you who are a little younger, that was a 56K modem. And it's how we access the internet. That'll wake you up. Just 8,000 days ago. But over the last 8,000 days, all technologists have achieved is a 1,400-fold improvement in bandwidth capacity. And my guess is each and every one of you has a smartphone on you today, and you are accessing that 1,000-fold increase. My point is you've lived through 1,000-fold increase. And I'm here to tell you, you're going to live through some more. But this is the first trend I want to tell you about, is bandwidth. We're not done with this. Today, in most areas, we already have 3 and 4G speeds. But let me show you what they're doing out in Seattle with 4G speeds. And any of you who are in the retail industry, you can't tell me your world's not about to change.
No lines, no checkouts, no registers. Welcome to Amazon Go.
You just walk into a store, grab whatever you want, and you walk out, and it's immediately deducted from your bank account. Now, this is not just going to affect the retail industry. If you're in the banking industry, I mean, as customers, if customers can get things that easily in their grocery store, their expectations for getting service in the bank, in the hospital, everywhere else is going to increase. But let me show you another example of 4G speed. You can't tell me that the world of education isn't about to change, because it's already changing. Here's what some manufacturers are doing with 4G speeds, and they're using it for something called augmented reality, layering digital information on top of the physical world.
The technician puts on his HoloLens. He already sees, I have a call here, I need to go to this elevator, and then actually sees a 3D picture of the elevator that he's going to work on, and that he can zoom into a part that will offer you also training.
So how we're going to be training nurses, doctors, manufacturers is about to change. But here's where it's going to get really interesting. In the next couple of years, we're going to go from 4G to 5G. And doesn't that sound like a nice incremental increase? Oh, we're just going from 4G to 5G. That's no big deal. Yeah, folks, it is. It's going to be 100-fold faster. So what are we going to be able to do with 100-fold faster internet? Well, here's where things get really weird. That Intel just this week came out with this product. I'm going to show you this clip, and then I might need to explain what's happening
when
here.
I saw the first smartphone, I didn't go and say, wow, ride sharing, that's going to happen. But the fact is, ride sharing would have never happened without smartphones. We're excited about this because it enables new use cases for developers to come up with.
To try to figure out what all those use cases could be, later this year, Intel will open an early access program so developers can get units and start making stuff that works with Avant.
So these smart glasses, you know what they're doing? They're taking lasers and they're putting the information in your retina. They're putting the information right on your eye. And so as people have access to that information, whether we like it or not, the world could change in some powerful ways with 5G speeds. The next trend where we might see 1,000-fold increase, this is 3D printing, additive manufacturing. Here's what Adidas started doing last year. It's a little hard to understand what's happening in this video clip, but these shoes are actually being pulled out of a pool of molten material, and then with microbursts of light and oxygen, the shoe is being formed. But here's the point. They printed 5,000 shoes last year, 100,000 this year. Next year, 500,000, and then we're going to see a 1,000-fold increase. And we're going to go from 5,000 to 5 million shoes. And as that happens, the world of manufacturing changes. Instead of producing shoes over in China, putting them on a ship, transporting them across an ocean, putting them on a truck, delivering them to communities, we're going to be printing very sophisticated objects right in our backyard. So that represents a real opportunity for manufacturing to bring manufacturing jobs back to the tri-state area. But let me just show you what else is happening with 3D printers. They're already doing this out in California.
The walls of this house were printed entirely on site. This is the world's first actually printed house.
3D printed houses are already a reality. And you can't tell me that these printers aren't going to get better, faster, and more affordable. And as they do, the world of construction suddenly changes, and affordable housing might become even more affordable. We have to be aware of these trends because they're happening really fast. The next trend I want to tell you about, advances in robotics. The best example is, of course, there are already self-driven robotic trucks on the road, right? And John Wood has a trucking program. But how many of you saw, just 3 weeks ago, a truck drove itself from Long Beach to Jacksonville, Florida, all the way across the country? That was just a couple of weeks ago. But to help you understand how weird the future is going to be, again, sometimes it just helps to appreciate how weird things are today. I came across this photo recently. This is a self-driven truck delivering self-driven cars to Phoenix, Arizona. And you can now go to Phoenix, Arizona and get a ride for free in a self-driven car, effective today. It just happened today. And this company is called Waymo. They're going to have a fleet of 1,000 self-driven taxis down in the Phoenix area this year. But here's the number of miles that have been driven in autonomous vehicles. The technology actually started 9 years ago. But like many exponential trends, it started really slow. But by May of last year, we'd reached 3 million miles. And I'm here to tell you, there is a real possibility we're going to go from 3 million miles to 3 billion miles to 3 trillion miles. And as that happens, the transportation sector changes, the automotive industry changes, how we design and think about cities and towns changes. And again, you might think that this isn't going to happen that fast, but I want you to go back to that picture of New York City in 1900. All horses, 13 years later, poof, gone. The world is changing fast. And I suspect many of you, especially with trucking programs, like, what are we going to do about all of the truckers? And first, I'd say, trucking jobs are not going to go away. Some of them will, but how they go about their job will change. But again, some jobs will, and we need to be thinking seriously about how we retrain those individuals for other and new jobs sooner rather than later, because this future is barreling down upon us. The next trend I need you to be aware of, another 1,000-fold increase. This is something known as the Internet of Things. This is the idea that we're going to start putting tiny computer chips onto physical objects and connect those physical objects to the Internet. Today, we're at 20 billion physical objects connected to the Internet. Next 2 years, we're going to go to 50 billion. 10 years later, trillion physical objects connected to the Internet. This is a little nebulous idea, so here's how I want you to understand the Internet of Things. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you might remember 10 years ago we had the tragic bridge collapse. Well, that bridge was rebuilt in record time, but when we rebuilt it, we embedded 400 sensors into that bridge. So it's a super smart bridge that's connected to the Internet. It can tell us traffic flow, temperature, pressure, vibration, all sorts of things. So that might beg the question, well, if that's a super smart bridge, what's a super dumb bridge? Well, here, my friends, is a super dumb bridge. And we have hundreds of thousands of them all across the country. Now, I don't know whether President Trump will be able to reach across the aisle and work with the Democrats on a national infrastructure bill. But if they do, they should really think about making our physical infrastructure ready for the 21st century. We need to make our roads, our bridges, all sorts of things smart. And I know that you have a thriving healthcare industry here. How many of you saw just 2 months ago the first ever digestible pill was approved by the Food and Drug Administrations? We're now making smart pills. We're now making smart buildings. This is the world's smartest, greenest building, 28,000 sensors. But because of those 28,000 sensors, you know how much they've been able to slash energy consumption in that building? 85%. We are going to be able to retrofit schools, hospitals, manufacturing facilities to make them super energy efficient in this new world of the Internet of Things. And we need to be aware of these trends. The next trend you need to be aware of, another 1,000-fold increase. This is gene sequencing technology. Here's how I want you to think about this technology. 10 years ago, this fella said, hey, I want to sequence my gene, want to understand my health better. And that's exactly what he did. But 10 years ago, you know how much it cost him? $100 million. He was a billionaire, so he could afford it. But gene sequencing technology is getting better every 4 months. So the corollary is the price is cut in half every 4 months. And if you cut $100 million in half, starting in March of 2008, Here's what happens. By March of 2016, it dropped to 10,000. Last March, 1,000. Today, you can get your genome sequenced for $99. But hold on to your hats. It's not going to stop there. By 2022, in the next 4 years, it's going to be more expensive for you and I to flush our toilet than it is to sequence our genome. Isn't that extraordinary? What cost $100 million 10 years ago is going to be pennies in the future? Yes. And you can't tell me that this isn't going to transform healthcare, the pharmaceutical industry, but it's also going to transform the agriculture industry. Why? Because we're not just sequencing the human genome, we're sequencing the genome of corn, of wheat, of soybeans, of cattle. And we're going to come to some new insights that are going to transform our world in powerful ways, and we need to be aware of these trends. The next trend we need to be aware of, advances in artificial intelligence. And let me just give you a concrete example of how powerful artificial intelligence is. Just 4 months ago, John Deere spent $300 million to buy an artificial intelligence company. And here's what it does. And again, you can't tell me it's not going to transform agriculture, because artificial intelligence already is.
Cameras, computers, and artificial intelligence to allow ag machines to see every plant in a field. We thought that we could give farmers the ultimate flexible tool to treat their field and manage their field in whatever way they wanted by having the knowledge of every plant and its situation and an ability to spray very precisely, whether it be herbicide only to the weeds or fertilizer or fungicide directly on each plant that needed it.
They are optimizing farming seed by seed. They know which seed needs how much water and which fertilizer at what time. The world is changing really fast because of these trends, and we need to be aware of them. The next trend, another 1,000-fold increase, the amount of data we are collecting from our farm fields on our health, from our smartphones, in our buildings, is about to increase exponentially. But here's how I want you to think of data. Regardless of what business you're in, you need to understand you're in the data business. And here's why. The company that best understands this won't surprise anyone. It's Amazon. But could I just see a show of hands? How many of you already have Amazon Echo in your house? I mean, look at that. That's remarkable. Close to 40% of you already have artificial intelligence in your homes. And the product's only 2 years old. But every time you interact with Amazon Echo, what are they doing? Well, they're collecting a little more digital data dust. And here's what Amazon has said they want to do with all of that data.
Anything you want on Earth, you're going to get from us.
Anything you want on Earth, you're going to get for us.
That's where we're headed, I believe.
Anything on Earth. And just last week, they said, we're getting into banking. The month before that, they said, we're getting into healthcare. They're now collecting so much data on us that their end goal is to know what you and I want and what we need, and they're going to try and get it to us as quickly as possible. And it's not just books or consumer items. It could be preventative health care. It could be financing. It could be loans. The world is changing, and all of us need to be aware of how we can start harnessing data to do things differently. But now I want to transition and talk a little bit about the H in the big aha, and that is humility. And what I mean here is we all need humility to the idea that the way we did things yesterday might not be sufficient moving forward. I'm going to give you a little test for humility. What I want you to do is I want you to just turn to the person sitting next to you and answer for them. In your area, whether it is in Missouri, Illinois, or Iowa, what two colors are the yield sign? Go ahead, tell the person next to you what two colors are the yield sign. Okay, I have heard the answer. So how many of you said yellow or yellow and black? Congratulations. That was the correct answer up until 1971. The yield sign has been red and white since, wait for it, Richard Nixon was in the White House. Inevitably, some of you are going, no way, that's not true. Yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. The first yield sign you see after leaving John Wood Community College going to be red and white, and curiously enough, every other one all the way home will be. Inevitably, I know one or two of you are going to want to pigeonhole me and say, well, in my rural area of Iowa, they're still yellow. No, they're not yellow and black anywhere in North America, and they haven't been for decades. But to me, It's a great metaphor for humility. Look, it is a fact that many of us, years ago when we were first learning to drive, yield signs were yellow and yellow and black. The problem is that old, crappy information has somehow just stayed stuck in our head, even in the face of overwhelming visual evidence to the contrary. We've been zipping by these signs for decades and it hasn't processed. My message to you is this: regardless of what business you are in, there are certain things you learned about your industry, your job, your customers, your business model, your competitors. Yep, they were all true yesterday. It doesn't mean that they are still true today. Each and every one of us needs humility to the idea that not everything that sits up here is still necessarily true. Now, those of you folks who said yellow or yellow and black, I'm not done with you yet. If you're a little curious as to what your brain looks like, here's what your brain kind of looks like. So it looked good back in the day. But now, let me just give you another example. So that's kind of a lighthearted example, but if I was here 10 years ago and said in most major cities like St. Louis, Chicago, Des Moines, what color are taxis? What would most of us have said 10 years ago? Yeah, well, like the yield sign, they're yellow. But of course, is that true anymore? How many of you have used Uber or Lyft when you've gone to, so it looks like close to 80% of you. But here's my point. Uber and Lyft could not have existed 10 years ago. Smartphones, cloud computing, GPS technology all existed 10 years ago, but they had not yet gotten exponentially better and then converged into a platform to do what? What do Uber and Lyft really do? Well, they help strangers give strangers rides safely, and that's what they do. And how many of us grew up with our mothers telling us, never get into a car with a stranger? And now we're doing it all the time. So again, I mean, the world can change fast, but what Uber and Lyft really represent is something called the sharing economy. But here's how I want you to understand the sharing economy. I'm just going to put up this little factoid for you. And how many of you have a drill? Could I just see a show of hands? Most of us do. And unless you're a real builder or a hobbyist, most of us use a drill 13 minutes our entire life. So the question of the future is this: does everyone on your city block, in your apartment complex, in your small town need to own a drill? No, they don't. They just need to access a drill. And they're going to do this with drills. They might do it with automobiles. They might do it with lawnmowers. They might do it with boats. It is not the world many of us grew up in, but many young people are saying, why should I own stuff when I can access it at a fraction of the cost? And oh, by the way, I don't have to store it. I don't have to pay insurance on it. The world is changing fast, and we need humility, especially those of us who are a little older. The world is changing. We need to wake up to it. Now, I recently came across this photo on one of my social media feeds. I don't know who this guy is. He's a high school teacher. I suspect he's a great teacher. But for the last 40 years, for his yearbook photo, he's been wearing the exact same sweater vest. And I thought that was hilarious. But then as I thought about it, it's like, oh, no, that's another great metaphor. And here's the metaphor. How often do we hear, especially senior executives in agriculture, healthcare, banking, say, well, I have 25, 30, 40 years of experience in the industry. And sometimes people truly do have 30, 40 years of experience. Sometimes, however, they have 1 year of experience repeated 25, 30, or 40 times. They're all things, certain things we learned early in our career. And in a world of linear change, that's fine. But in a world of exponential change, what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. And I love this quote because I was just driving through Hannibal yesterday, of course, hometown of Mark Twain. It's a wonderful quote that education consists mainly of what we unlearn. I'm here to tell you, we're going to have to unlearn a lot of the things that we think we know about our jobs, our industries in this new world, and we need humility. Here's another great example of humility. The iPhone, we just celebrated the 10th anniversary of the iPhone. When it came out, here was Steve Ballmer's reaction. He was then CEO of Microsoft. Here's what he thought about the iPhone 10 years ago.
Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard.
Doesn't have a keyboard. Okay, so here's my point, is that Steve Ballmer is not a dumb man. I don't mean to suggest that he is, but could he have had a little humility? Absolutely. And I'm here to tell you, maybe you've already heard in my presentation ideas that sound crazy, but I can guarantee you, in the very near future, you're going to hear ideas that sound absolutely crazy, and you're going to want to dismiss them. Not for a moment am I suggesting you have to accept every wild-eyed idea about the future. I am, however, suggesting we all need humility. We all need to keep an open mind. And let me just give you a concrete example of this. How many of you have started to read about the advances in artificial meat or clean meat? My guess is most of you are going, ooh, who would ever want to do that? Well, let me just tell you, Cargill, Tyson's, two of the world's largest food companies are already investing in artificial meat. So is Bill Gates, so is Richard Branson. So that your question should be not, ooh, that will never happen. Your question should be, why are these really big, successful companies and successful individuals investing in a technology that I think sounds awful? Well, it's because they see potentially a lot of opportunity. Again, I don't know if artificial meat will take off, but it's now already being served in 2,000 TGIFs. How many of you knew that? You can buy it in 2,000 Safeway stores. It's here, and if this technology undergoes a 1,000-fold increase, what does it mean for the livestock industry? Again, I don't want to say this will happen, but just because you think it might sound a little out there doesn't mean that other consumers won't. So let's just keep an open mind about the future. Now, this is a visual metaphor for humility. Often, when we're introduced to new technologies, we love to think, oh, I understand how I'm going to use this. But sometimes we should have a little humility. You're all going to recognize the technology in this clip. It's the desktop computer. But let's just watch how this individual dealt with it 30 years ago. So I showed that to my teenagers a while back, and they're like, well, that's just dumb, Dad. Of course, the whole joke was lost on them because they had no idea what a manual typewriter was. So again, a lot of us laugh at this now, but I think a lot of us look at some of these new technologies, self-driven trucks, artificial meat, that's ridiculous, never going to happen. But let me relate this to another technology that some people might think is ridiculous, and this is virtual reality. Of course, this is a wearable technology. You put the goggles on, and it feels as though you are wherever the goggles are showing you to be. How many of you have tried virtual reality? So it looks like about 30% of you. Those who have not yet experienced virtual reality, let me try and give you a sense of what it's all about. This grandma is watching Jurassic Park, so she feels as though she's in a park with dinosaurs. Let's check it out. So apparently it's pretty good. But again, I know that some of you are looking at that and go, well, okay, it might be good for video gamers or watching a movie, but I'm in the serious world of manufacturing. It has no relevance to me. Well, let me just show you how Elon Musk is using virtual reality. I want to relate it back to 3D printing. And you can't tell me that the future of education and the way we train workers isn't about to change, because it already is.
And then finally, we used the Oculus Rift, which is immersive virtual reality that actually tracks your head position, and you really are moving around the object. It feels like it's right there in front of you. Now let's use this for an actual component on the rocket, which is a cryogenic valve housing. You can really apply your intuition and take something from your mind to a physical object with far greater ease than we currently do. Now that we've gotten the object out of our head and into the computer, how do we get it out of the computer and into reality? So we're actually going to print this with a 3D laser metal printer.
You can have an idea in your head, you can design it in virtual reality and print out the physical manifestation of that product. That's where we are today. You can't tell me that this technology isn't going to get better, but here's how Elon Musk leveraged that technology, and many of you saw it just 3 weeks ago. For the first time ever, we put rockets into space, and we then re-landed those rockets. A private entrepreneur beat NASA, which had been working on it for 50 years. Why? I would submit it's because he is thinking about doing things differently. And we need to begin being aware of these technologies and figuring out how they're going to transform all of our industries. But now, One last act that requires a little humility is this. And this is especially appropriate for those of us who are a little bit older. Get a reverse mentor. Get someone who is younger, less experienced, to help you understand the future. I'm going to give you a little test as to whether you'd benefit from a reverse mentor. This was not an entrance exam to a kindergarten. I didn't know kindergartens had entrance exams, but apparently some do. And the 5-year-olds had 20 seconds to determine what parking spot number that car was in. Since you're all a little older, see if you can figure it out. And if you can, don't shout out the answer, just keep it to yourself. But what parking spot number is that car in? Okay, how many people are confident of their answer? Could I just see a show of hands? Usually about 10% are, and tell me what it is. 87, yeah, and all you had to do to figure it out is you just had to flip the problem upside down. My guess is many of you are like, oh, I'm a smart person. It's like 2x minus 4. There's some pattern. But my point is, here's all reverse mentors do. Sometimes those of us with more experience, we get so locked in to seeing our industry, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing, banking, healthcare, from one perspective, that what we benefit from is someone younger with less experience. Why? Because they see the world from a different perspective. So if you do not have a reverse mentor, I can't encourage you strongly enough to get one. But now, in the interest of time, let me just go to the last A in the big aha, and that stands for action. And here's the one action I need you all to take. I actually advocate that leaders take 1 week every year just to think about the future, but I know that most people won't do that, so here is the simple version. I call it my Future 15. Every Friday at 4:45, just take 15 minutes to think about the future. And I'm going to share with you, I have a 1-page document. It's called my Think Week Resource Guide of really great websites, periodicals, individuals I follow that will give you a handful of articles every week just to think about how the world is changing. But here's the thing that we all need to be thinking about. I came across this quote recently, and I think it's pretty close to a factual statement. Today is the slowest rate of change any of us will ever see again. Tomorrow's just going to be a little bit faster. The day after that, a little bit faster. But here's what it means to all of us. Whether you have kids, grandkids, we need to be thinking about their future differently, because a report just came out and said a kindergartner today, 65% of them are going to be working in jobs that don't even exist today. We need to transform our educational system and prepare our kids for a future that does not yet exist. And I think if we could all agree on one thing, it is that our educational system is still pretty much the same as it was in the 19th and 20th century. And we need to bring it up to the 21st century. And if you don't think it's moving fast, I'm just going to show you this little clip. It's about quantum computing.
IBM is working on the biggest leap in computing ever. In a small, nondescript office in the basement of their research lab in Yorktown, New York, they're building a quantum computer, a machine that can provide answers in minutes to problems that would take regular computers years to crack.
I don't know. Problems in finance, healthcare, agriculture that used to take years to crack, we're going to be solving them in hours and then potentially minutes. Our world is about to change, and again, we need to be preparing people for a different future. But after we've done all this thinking, I need you to take time to think twice. Who could tell me, who sees 2 other words embedded in think twice? There are 2 words. Anyone see it? I just shout out. Well, it's thin ice. And I'm here to tell you, we're all on thinner ice than we might appreciate. Our world is about to change. And let me just give you a concrete example. This just comes from the insurance world. Elon Musk, his new Tesla vehicle, has artificial intelligence embedded in it. And because of that, their cars are getting exponentially smarter and safer. And they've said in the next 2 years, their cars are going to be able to prevent 90% of all accidents. Now, no insurance company is going to give you a 90% discount on your insurance premium. But you know who is? Tesla is. They're not going to call it insurance. They're just kind of baking it into the price. The insurance industry is on thin ice. But again, virtually every industry is, and we need to be thinking about how we innovate into the new future to avoid some of these problems. But after you've done all this thinking, take a little time to think harder. How many of you have started to hear about blockchain? There are a handful of you. It's a really complicated technology, but this is your homework assignment. Those of you who have not yet heard about blockchain, there are 19 industries that it could potentially affect in a material way. And I'm just going to talk about one, but there are 19. This is real estate.
Some of the issues in buying and selling real estate are bureaucracy, lack of transparency, fraud, and mistakes in public records. Using blockchain technology can speed up transactions by reducing the need for paper-based record keeping. It can also help with tracking, verifying ownership, ensuring accuracy of documents, and transferring property deeds. Ubiquity is a blockchain-secured platform for real estate record keeping.
So what that means is, within the next couple of years, if I want to buy your house, that transaction might not take a real estate agent. It might not take titles and deeds and lawyers and loan officers. We might be able to execute that instantaneously because of the blockchain technology. But again, there are 18 other industries that are going to be affected by it. I don't have time to go into all of them, but start doing some research. Think about this, read about it, and take time to just prepare yourself for a different future. But after you've done all this thinking, I want you to think 10x. Regardless of what industry you are in, we can do things differently. Just a couple of weeks ago, this company just received $900 million in financing. And if you're in the construction industry, your world's about to change. That building used to take 12 months to build. They're now doing it in 17 days. That's more than a 10x improvement. And the way they're doing it, they're leveraging data, they're leveraging artificial intelligence, they're leveraging robotic technology, they're leveraging 3D printers. The world is changing, and we need to be thinking about it. But after we've done all this thinking, I want you to think bigger about the future. And I'm going to end on this note because I'm going to tie together the principles of awareness, humility, and action. And to do that, I'm going to ask you a question, then I'm going to give away another copy of my book. So here's what I want you to do. I want you, for sake of argument, I want you to picture a pond, and let's just say it's the size of this room. And let's say it is the first day of April, that spring has arrived, and on the first day of April, there's a single lily pad on this pond. It's really tiny, but it doubles every day in April. So on April 2nd, there would be 2. The next day, we'd go to 4. Then we'd go to 8, 16, 32, 64. You get the idea. It keeps on doubling. So can everyone sort of picture that exponential growth? And on the last day, the entire pond is covered with these tiny little lily pads. So here's the question. On day 20, so 2/3 of the way through that doubling, how much is covered? And just shout out guesses, or if someone thinks they know they have the answer, I'm going to give the book to whoever gets the answer within 1%. So just shout out some guesses. 20% no, 100% no, 5 no. 5 was the closest, a little bit 4, a little bit 2. Who said 1? I'm going to give it to you, ma'am. You still win the book, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you know the more mathematically precise answer? No shame, you still win the book. The answer is 1/10 of 1%. Now, undoubtedly, all of you are going, what do you mean? You just spent the last 40 minutes telling me how fast all of these technologies were doubling, and you said the lily pad was doubling, but it only covers 1/10 of 1%? Yes, this is exactly what I need you to understand about the future. Because what else did I say at the beginning? If something doubles 10 times, it could be 10 additional times. How much bigger does something get? Do you remember? It gets 1,000 times bigger. So even though it's been doubling, the really big change, by day 25, we're just a little over 3%. Not until day 29 that we get to 50, but once we get to 50, the very next day, boom, the whole thing is covered. Why do I show you this? Well, I suspect that some of you are still thinking to yourself, well, Mr. Future Man, the world's changing as fast as you say it is. How come my world feels pretty much the same? My message to you is this. Every technology I've told you about has, in fact, been doubling. What I need all of you to understand, we're just at day 20. The really big change is just ahead of us. This is the future we need to be aware of. This amount of change is going to require humility, but it demands that we do something. And look, I know I've just dropped a really big bomb on you, but I want to leave you on an optimistic note that you're going to be able to handle this future. And you know why I'm so optimistic? Because you've already done it. I gave you that earlier example of the 56K modem. You navigated that 1,000-fold increase. Let me give you another one. How many of you can remember the hit movie from the late 80s, Wall Street? Remember that movie? Michael Douglas played Gordon Gekko. But to show he's a high-powered titan of Wall Street, can any of you remember what they showed him using in that movie? It was this huge brick-like cell phone. Well, today, virtually everyone on the planet has that, only it's better, faster, and more affordable. Smartphone technology has undergone more than 1,000-fold increase. It's gone to 1 million and 1 billion-fold increase, and you've all lived it, and you're benefiting from it. Of course, there are some problems with it, and I don't want to minimize that. But again, I just want to anticipate one last question. A lot of people say, well, Mr. Future Man, where are my flying cars then? Excellent question. Well, flying car technology has, in fact, been getting exponentially better, but we're just at day 20. And if you don't believe me, this just happened 3 weeks ago in China. The world is changing. So what is next? Well, as a futurist, I do not claim to predict the future. But there's a wonderful quote from Peter Drucker who said this: the only way to predict the future is to create it yourself. The one thing I know, all of these technologies, they're real. They are here today, and they are going to grow exponentially more powerful. So the future of the tri-state region, it's in your hands. And those entrepreneurs, business, community educating leaders who embrace these technologies to do what you've always done, but to do it better, faster, and more affordably, your future could be incredibly bright. But again, you need to be aware of them, you need to be prepared to do things differently, and then you need to start building and creating that future today. So thank you very much for having me. I look forward to talking with you during the break.